Thank you so much, Linda, and it's a delight to be here with you, with Leadership Global, and with all of you. Great to see some familiar faces. My friend Bart, Tom, my best friend's mom is here, guys. It's getting real. So I'm delighted to be with you, and I would love to make this as interactive as possible. So I have a few prepared remarks in terms of what is a speak-up culture, how we can build it, the responsibility leaders have to build it. And a secret I'm going to share with you is I've written a philosophy book disguised as a business book. So this is about a way of life, and I think some change that can happen beyond business in life and society in general. So I'm pumped to share it with you. And then we're going to have a ton of time for conversation and discussion. So I appreciate those who have their videos on and welcome you to keep it on and to come off mute and speak up and have a conversation. Because if I don't generate a speak up culture as we go through this, I'm kind of a fraud. So please help me ask questions, push back. Would love to make this a conversation and a dialogue. So I wrote this book for a couple of reasons. One, I grew up with a stutter. I still have a stutter, a speech impediment. Most people can't tell, but I can, and it still can get in the way of me speaking, which is ironic because I speak as part of what I do for my living now. I married a speech therapist. Good choice, not just for me, more so for my kids and my nieces and nephews. So that's one reason, is I know what it feels like to have something you want to say, but lack the confidence, physiology, know-how to speak up and have your voice be heard. I've also been parts of organizations and in relationships personally and professionally where there is a speak up culture, when we can share how we feel and how we think, and it makes things better. Relationships go stronger. Innovation is a result. It's the bee's knees. It's wonderful. I've also been parts of relationships where there isn't a speak up culture. It's more likely a zip it or a culture of silence. And we go out of our way to avoid sharing what we feel or think. Because typically the finger's pointed back at us and we're the problem. And maybe you've experienced this before: gaslighting, toxic positivity. It ain't fun. And so that's why I've written this book, because I want for you, for me, for my kids, for your kids to have more relationships with their work and in society where there is a speak up culture, where we feel that it is safe and worth it to share what we think and share what we feel to make things better. So this is what I mean by a speak-up culture. A speak-up culture is an environment in which people feel it is both safe and worth it to share ideas, even if they're half-baked. I once shared an idea at an executive meeting that was half-baked, and I was punished for sharing a half-baked idea. That was the last idea I shared at that executive table ever. We can share concerns, even if they're unpopular or personal. We can share disagreements, especially with senior leaders. How does that go? When you start calling the boss's baby ugly, how does that go, right? And we can admit mistake, believing that admitting mistake will actually lead to improvement and not punishment. Psychological safety, if you're familiar with it, Amy C. Edmondson, who's a professor out of Harvard and is brilliant, both as an individual and her work, she stumbled into this phenomenon, psychological safety, from studying hospital room environments and the number of medical errors in environments where there is psychological safety, where we feel that we can take interpersonal risk. And she found that hospitals where there was trust and psychological safety, way better hospitals. But one interesting result was that in the hospitals where there wasn't psychological safety, there were fewer medical errors reported. Not fewer medical errors, but simply fewer medical errors reported. Because when it is not safe to take interpersonal risk, people were afraid that if they raised their hand and admitted mistake, that they would be fired, they would be punished, they would be labeled the problem. But when we do have psychological safety, when we do feel like we can take interpersonal risk with one another, we willingly raise our hands to make things better. Which hospital do you want to go to? The one where someone says, I didn't put the sponge in their liver, or the one where they raise their hand and say, we have to make this better for the outcomes of our patients and for the outcomes of each other? When I first started writing this book, I fully admit that I thought I was writing a book to simply rebrand psychological safety. While I love the concept, for me, too much of the work that was being done in the area was highly academic, like putting a white lab coat on top of a very human phenomena. And so I sort of leaned into my Zig Ziglar quote of people don't buy drills, they buy holes. And so while the drill may be psychological safety, the hole, what we get as a result, is a speak-up culture where people feel that it's safe and worth it to share ideas, concerns, disagreements, and mistakes. And as I digged in deeper, I realized that I was actually writing not just things differently, I was actually writing some different things. As we look at what a speak-up culture is, it is characterized by this 2x2 framework. Kim Scott, who's a brilliant author of the book Radical Candor. If you haven't checked that one out, highly recommend. It's all around how to care personally and challenge directly to give one another feedback that works and makes each other better and helps us grow. Kim taught me that we can boil down all of life's biggest challenges into a 2x2 framework. So I had to have a 2x2 framework in the book. Here's what it is. When we feel that it's safe and we feel that it's worth it to speak up, we have high safety, high impact. I speak up because it's safe and worth it. I believe that I will be okay. I will not be fired or harmed or made to be the problem, labeled to be the problem, gaslit if I speak up. And my speaking up actually makes things better. It leads to some sort of improvement. We want this. Upper right corner, absolutely. We don't want low safety, low impact. This is what I call an unhappy marriage between fear and apathy. I've been there. Perhaps you have, or you know someone who has. No fun. We don't speak up because we feel that it's not worth it. This is where quiet quitting or resignation happens in this lower left quadrant. Now, the last two quadrants are really interesting. I'll start with the top left. High safety, low impact. I'll speak up, but it won't matter. This happens where we might feel safe to speak up, but because of bureaucracy, systemic issues, or a change in habit that will be too hard, we don't feel that it will lead to any meaningful change. So as an example, you could have a friend who is doing something that is self-harming. It is not good for them, and you know it. They may even know it. You might feel safe to say to them, hey, stop doing that, but you have very little faith that it will lead to any positive or meaningful change. That's high safety, low impact. You might still speak up, but it likely won't create a change. The bottom right corner here is really interesting. Low safety, high impact. I'm afraid to speak up, but the stakes are too high to remain silent. This is when people feel that the cost of remaining silent is too high. They feel emotionally connected to a cause that allows them, empowers them, enables them to step into courageous leadership. Ed Pearson, who is a senior manager at Boeing when they were making the 737 MAX, was one of these people. He's a retired naval officer. He was on the production line making this new plane that he saw was unsafe. And to his own risk, to his reputation, his relationships, even his job, he did not feel safe to, but he felt too connected to the fact that if these planes went down, hundreds, if not thousands of people would die. And he spoke up. And it wasn't until 2 planes went down and killed 346 people that finally the president of the United States and the FAA stepped in and shut down the production of the Boeing 737 MAX. It's now in the sky. It's apparently safe. I've been on a few of them, but Ed says they're still not safe. So passenger beware. That is a quintessential example of not feeling safe, but displaying the courageous leadership to speak up. In the case of Ed, he attempted to speak up internally to the right people, to the general manager of the Renton facility where they were making the plane, to senior leaders, C-suite leaders of Boeing, and eventually he became a whistleblower, and he shared his concerns with the safety of that plane at U.S. Congress. So this is when we can become a whistleblower as well. At personal risk, we speak up. It doesn't go anywhere, and so we go public. So that's the phenomenon. High safety, high impact, make it safe and make it worth it for people to speak up. I've also learned that there's a virtuous cycle. So how do we actually create this environment where people feel that it's both safe and worth it to speak up, regardless of their level within an organization or if they have a personal relationship with us? Well, leaders do 2 things. One, they encourage people to speak up. And then when people do speak up, they reward them for speaking up. And it's a virtuous cycle and it ripples. So what I mean by this is that, let's say I report into Linda. Linda's my leader. And I have an idea that I think can make things better. I see something that actually is making things worse, and I think it's the right thing to do to go to Linda and say, hey, there's an opportunity for improvement here. I go to Linda, I say, is it a good time to speak? I have an idea. Linda says, yes, I speak up. Now, if it goes well, guess what I do? I tell my friends. I tell my colleagues, I tell my peers, and then all of a sudden, we have an environment where it is both encouraged and rewarded. It's safe and worth it to speak up. That positively ripples. If I went to my boss or leader and it didn't go well, I also report back, and my likelihood of speaking up and those of my peers and colleagues lowers. Encourage means I value your voice. Encourage means you can see and you know more than I do. Encourage means asking questions like, on a scale of 0 to 10, how clear and valuable is this presentation? And if you all say 10, I think you're lying. I want to improve. We're doing everything in our power to just get someone to speak up a little bit. We can do breakout rooms. We can use chat. We can use polls. All these things just to hear from the voice, get some input back from people. Now, here's the most important part. When people do speak up and share an idea, a concern, a disagreement, or a mistake, do we repeatedly ignore them, or do we punish them, or do we reward them? Reward them looks like, thank you. That must have taken courage. I appreciate you speaking up. Reward means, I don't quite understand what you're saying, but I think you're onto something. Tell me more. Reward means we didn't implement your idea, but here's why. Keep it coming. I like where your head's at, right? Reward doesn't mean a raise, a bonus, or a promotion, or a statue made in your honor outside of corporate headquarters. Reward means you matter, I value you, keep it coming. There's one pilot with a major airline, very senior pilot, has an amazing safety record, and he says before every single flight to his crew, I've never flown a perfect flight, and today is no exception. I need to hear what you see, right? That's encouraging. And then especially if someone brings you bad news or something hard to hear, you must reward them even if it's hard to hear. As the saying often goes, bad news never gets better with time. Let me see what else I want to share here. Yes, the wisdom of pickles. So a couple more things here, and then I want to pause and see what questions you have. And please ask questions as it relates to bringing these ideas to life in your work and in your relationships. So I really highlight in this book the importance of what it means to be a leader, and leadership to me is more behavior than title. There are many titles who do not behave as leaders. Leadership is about the behaviors we display. Do we sacrifice? Do we serve? Are we authentic? Are we consistent? Are we decisive? Do we give credit often and take ownership and responsibility when things go right? Leadership is a behavior. And as well, a huge piece that I highlight in the book, obviously it's in the title, is culture. But what does culture mean? How does it influence people? And how do we actually build culture? So I have a few ideas. One is, let's look to pickles. So we can take a world-class cucumber, put it in some awful pickle brine, and we, my friends, have an awful pickle that should never have been made. We can also take a pretty cruddy cucumber, put it in some excellent pickle brine, and we have an amazing pickle. What this means is that the cucumber doesn't matter as much as the brine. Obviously, we want both, but this is a metaphor for our cultures. This is a metaphor for the fact that the environment actually matters more than the people. You can take an amazingly talented, good, strong, valued individual, put them in a broken system or a broken, toxic environment, and they're capable of doing awful things. Similarly, we can take someone who's never been given a chance in their life and put them in a good, healthy environment with education and support and psychological safety, and they're able to contribute and do absolutely remarkable things. The environment matters more than the people. So how do we actually create culture, and what does it mean? I've devised a little equation for it, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. So culture equals values multiplied by behavior to the power of influence. So, of course, organizations ought to have values. If you don't have values, it could just be chaos. We need to give people some parameters of what it means to be successful here. It's not just about achieving results. It's the way in which we behave in achieving those results. Now, if we articulate values, put them on our screensaver or on our walls and don't do anything with them, anything multiplied by 0 is 0, right? Enron, take Enron as an example. And if you're not familiar with them, they had a huge accounting scandal a number of years ago, an oil and gas company. Enron had values. They were, and I kid you not, communication, respect, integrity, which is hilarious, and excellence. Excellence to me is my least favorite value because it's meaningless. Like, do me a favor, Kim, more excellence this afternoon. Aye, aye. Like, what does he want? I don't know. Just be more excellent. It's meaningless, right? But if I took the behavior of what excellence means, maybe it means do more of your best work. Okay, now I should discover and amplify my strengths. I should figure out what my gaps and limitations and weaknesses are, and team. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So if we have values and don't behave them, anything multiplied by 0 is 0. If we worse, have values and live and behave counter to them, as happened at Enron, we can actually have a negative, deleterious, or toxic culture, because anything multiplied by a negative is a negative. Now it's raised to the power of influence, because what that means is the more influence we have in our culture, which might be seniority or authority, or it could be by virtue of the relationships that we hold. I've had roles in organizations where I've had 0 authority, but I had influence because I had close relationships with the people who had authority. When you're chief of staff of an organization, I didn't have any direct reports or decision-making authority, but I could influence, right? People treated me differently. And so the behavior and the values individually for those who have influence in our cultures bears more weight. It means more if a senior leader doesn't behave in line with the values, or does, than it does for someone that we hired last week in a junior role. Sorry, we're a hierarchical species. It's just the way that it is. Let me see if I have anything else here I want to share for the time being. Let's see. So I'll share a few more thoughts here. So how do we bring a speak up culture to life? Obviously, encourage people to share their ideas, concerns, disagreement, and mistakes. Reward them when they do, especially if it's bad news, especially if it's hard to hear. If you don't, you just may never hear bad news again, and it's suddenly swept under the rug. Again, I didn't put the sponge in their liver. No, we want environments where we raise our hand and say, hey, we need to improve things here. Enact your values. Remember the culture equation. The purpose of your values is to live them, not to plaster them onto the walls or on our screensavers. Recognize and reward people when they behave the values. Offer feedback and coaching to those who don't. It's important to figure out not just achieving the results, but what are the behaviors that we reward when we achieve those results. There's one organization I worked with that had a VP who had the best results in the entire company, but the culture scores of her team were the lowest of the low. And she was actually demoted and offered an opportunity to go back into the leadership boot camp at that company to relearn what it means, not just to get results, but to actually lead a team. And within 2 years, she re-earned her VP status and had not just the best numbers, but the best culture scores as well. And finally, mind your influence as a leader. And Linda said this in the opening, your whisper is a shout and tiptoes are stomps. That's the book. I would be delighted to figure out from all of you what made sense, what's rubbish, and how these concepts and anything within and beyond can help you in your leadership, in your business, in your career.